He thought the abandoned Christmas lodge would give his grieving children one last holiday memory before they lost everything. But when the frozen cellar door cracked open beneath the kitchen floor, what stared back wasn't just ice and darkness. It was $270 million in stolen cash and the ghosts of a crime that had haunted an entire town for 33 years. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The snow fell heavy over Pine Ridge that December morning, thick flakes that blurred the edges of the world and turned everything soft and muted. Except for Marcus Reed, nothing about his life felt soft anymore. He sat alone at the kitchen table of his cramped rental house, staring at a stack of past-due notices illuminated by the pale gray light filtering through frost-covered windows. The electric bill was 2 months overdue. The rent notice had the word "final" stamped across it in angry red ink, and the medical collection letters, those never stopped coming. They arrived like clockwork, each one a fresh reminder of the life he'd lost and the debt that kept him chained to grief. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of construction work, trembled slightly as he sorted through the envelopes. He'd been up since 4 in the morning, unable to sleep, unable to quiet the endless calculations running through his mind. Rent, plus utilities, plus groceries, plus gas, plus the minimum payment on the credit card he'd maxed out paying for his wife's funeral. The math never worked. No matter how many times he ran the numbers, they always came up short. Always. Behind him, the old refrigerator hummed and rattled, a sound he'd grown so accustomed to that he barely noticed it anymore. The kitchen was small, outdated, with peeling linoleum and cabinets that didn't close properly. But it was clean. He made sure of that. It was one of the few things he could still control. The breakfast dishes from earlier sat drying in the rack. 3 bowls, 3 spoons, 3 glasses. Evidence of the 3 people who depended on him. The 3 people he was terrified of failing. Marcus heard movement upstairs, soft footsteps on creaking floorboards. His oldest daughter, Sarah, was awake. At 13, she'd become the ghost mother of the house, stepping into a role no child should ever have to fill. She made sure her younger siblings brushed their teeth, packed their lunches, remembered their homework. She did it all without complaint, without being asked, because she understood, in that terrible way that children of tragedy understand, that her father was drowning and someone needed to keep the ship from sinking completely. Sarah appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school in jeans and an oversized sweater that had once belonged to her mother. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her eyes, those same warm brown eyes that Anna had, carried a weariness that made Marcus's chest ache. She was too young to look that tired, too young to carry that weight. "Morning, Dad," she said quietly, moving to the counter to start the coffee maker. She did this every morning now, made the coffee, set out the cereal, woke her brothers, all the small rituals that kept their fractured family functioning. "Morning, sweetheart," Marcus replied, trying to inject warmth into his voice, trying to sound like a father who had his life together. He quickly gathered the bills and stuffed them back into their envelopes, not wanting her to see, not wanting her to worry more than she already did. But Sarah saw anyway. She always did. She glanced at the stack of envelopes, then at her father, and something flickered across her face. Understanding, pity, fear. She didn't say anything, though. She'd learned not to. Instead, she just filled the coffee maker with water and pressed the button, and the 2 of them stood in the quiet kitchen pretending everything was fine. 10 minutes later, Daniel came downstairs. He was 10 years old, small for his age, with shaggy blonde hair that fell into his eyes and a habit of chewing on the collar of his shirt when he was anxious, which was often. Daniel had stopped talking much after his mother died. Not completely, but enough that his teachers had started sending concerned notes home. Notes that Marcus didn't know how to respond to. How do you explain to a school counselor that your son has stopped talking because he watched his mother waste away in a hospital bed for 3 months? How do you explain that some pain is too big for words? Daniel grabbed a bowl from the cabinet and poured himself cereal in silence. He didn't make eye contact with Marcus. He rarely did anymore. It was as if looking at his father reminded him too much of everything they'd lost, and so he just looked down, looked away, looked anywhere else. "How'd you sleep, buddy?" Marcus asked, trying to bridge the gap that seemed to widen between them every day. Daniel shrugged, poured milk, sat down at the table with his bowl and started eating mechanically, each spoonful measured and joyless. Marcus felt the familiar stab of helplessness. He wanted to reach out, to pull his son close, to tell him that everything would be okay. But he couldn't lie, not to Daniel, not when the kid was smart enough to see through it. The last to emerge was Emma, 6 years old and still clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was a baby. Its fur was matted and one ear hung by a thread, but she refused to let anyone throw it away. She appeared at the bottom of the stairs in her pajamas, hair wild, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and sweet and heartbreaking. "Is Mommy coming home today?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. It happened less often now than it had in the first few months, but every time Emma asked, it tore him apart all over again. She was so young when Anna died, too young to fully understand permanence, too young to grasp that gone meant forever. Marcus knelt down and pulled Emma into his arms. She smelled like children's shampoo and sleep. "No, baby," he said softly, stroking her hair. "Remember? Mommy's in heaven now, but she loves you so much. She's always watching over you." Emma nodded against his shoulder, accepting the answer the way she always did, with a quiet resignation that no 6-year-old should possess. "Okay," she whispered, then pulling back. "Can I have pancakes?" "Not today, sweetheart," Marcus said, guilt twisting in his stomach. "How about cereal?" Emma's face fell, but she nodded. She understood. They couldn't afford pancakes, couldn't afford much of anything anymore. Sarah, who'd been watching the exchange with that too-old-for-her-age expression, quickly stepped in. "I'll make you cereal, Em, the kind with the marshmallows. We've got a little bit left." Emma brightened slightly and climbed into her chair. Sarah poured the cereal, added milk, and set the bowl in front of her little sister with the kind of gentle care that made Marcus want to weep. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Sarah was supposed to be worried about homework and friends and school dances, not playing mother to her grieving siblings, not watching her father fall apart in slow motion. After breakfast, Marcus loaded the kids into his beat-up Ford truck, the one with the cracked windshield and the passenger door that stuck. The heater barely worked, and they all huddled in their coats as Marcus drove them to Pine Ridge Elementary. The roads were slick with fresh snow, and the truck's bald tires slipped on every turn. He needed new tires, added it to the mental list of things he couldn't afford. At the drop-off line, Sarah turned to him before getting out. "Dad," she said quietly, "are we going to be okay?" Marcus forced a smile. "We're going to be fine, sweetheart, I promise." But the look in her eyes said she didn't believe him. She nodded anyway, then herded Daniel and Emma out of the truck and toward the school entrance. Marcus watched them go, 3 small figures trudging through the snow, and felt the weight of his failure pressing down on his chest like a boulder. He should be able to provide for them, should be able to give them stability, safety, hope. Instead, all he had were empty promises and mounting debt. After the school drop-off, Marcus drove to his first job. He worked as an overnight custodian at the school district offices, mopping floors and emptying trash cans from 11 at night until 6 in the morning. It paid $12 an hour, barely. Then, on weekends, he picked up shifts at Morrison's lumber yard, loading trucks and cutting boards for $15 an hour. Between the 2 jobs, he was pulling in maybe $2,000 a month. The rent alone was $1,300, but today was Wednesday. No lumberyard shift. No custodian shift until tonight, which left him with 8 hours of empty time and nowhere to be. He drove aimlessly for a while, the truck's engine coughing and sputtering, until he found himself parked outside Thompson's Gas and Feed, a run-down convenience store on the edge of town that served as the unofficial community bulletin board. Marcus went inside, bought a cup of watery coffee with the handful of change he'd scrounged from the truck's cup holder, and stood at the community board near the entrance. The board was covered with flyers, yard sales, lost cats, someone selling a couch, a handyman offering services, and there, half hidden beneath a notice about a church bake sale, Marcus saw it. For sale. Historic Christmas Lodge. 10 acres. Pine Ridge outskirts. Abandoned since 1991. Severe disrepair. Cash only. $15,000 or best offer. Serious inquiries only. There was one grainy photo. A sprawling stone and timber structure with a massive chimney, steep roof, and wraparound porch. It looked like something from another era. Something forgotten. Something haunted. Marcus stared at the listing for a long time. $15,000. He had exactly $16,000 left in his savings account. The emergency fund he'd been hoarding like a life raft. The money that was supposed to carry them through if he lost a job or the truck died or one of the kids got sick. The last buffer between his family and complete disaster. He pulled the flyer off the board and studied the photo more closely. There was something about the lodge that called to him. Maybe it was the word Christmas. Anna had loved Christmas, had decorated their home every year with the kind of joy and enthusiasm that made even Marcus, who'd never been particularly festive, believe in magic. This would be their first Christmas without her. The first time the kids wouldn't wake up to stockings and presents and their mother's laughter filling the house. Marcus folded the flyer and slipped it into his coat pocket. It was a stupid idea. Insane even. He couldn't afford to buy a property. Couldn't afford the taxes or insurance or repairs, but something about it wouldn't let him go. That evening, after picking the kids up from school and making them dinner, peanut butter sandwiches and apple slices because that's what was left in the cupboard, Marcus sat in the living room with his laptop balanced on his knees. The kids were watching television, some animated movie they'd seen a dozen times. Marcus searched for information about the Everlight Christmas Lodge. What he found was sparse. A few old newspaper articles from the 1950s and 60s, back when the lodge was in its heyday. Photos of families gathered around a massive stone fireplace, children opening presents, couples dancing under strings of lights. The lodge had been owned and operated by a man named Gerald Coleman and his wife Margaret. They'd built it in 1957 as a holiday destination, a place where families could come to experience an old-fashioned Christmas. But something had changed in the late 80s. The articles stopped. The lodge closed. Marcus found an obituary from 1991. Gerald Coleman. Died February 19th. Age 72. No surviving family. Cause of death. Heart attack. Found alone in the lodge. Marcus frowned. The lodge had been abandoned for 33 years, just sitting there, empty, forgotten. Why? What had happened to make Gerald Coleman shut it down? And why had no one bought it since? He kept searching, found a few forum posts on a local history website, people speculating about the lodge. Some claimed it was haunted. Others said Coleman had gone mad in his final years, refusing guests, boarding up windows, never leaving the property. One post mentioned strange lights seen in the windows at night, even though the electricity had been shut off decades ago. Marcus didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in desperation. And desperation made people do strange things, like consider spending their last dollar on an abandoned lodge in the woods. He pulled out the flyer and stared at the phone number at the bottom. Before he could talk himself out of it, he dialed. A woman answered on the third ring. Holt Realty. Hi, Marcus said, his voice rougher than he intended. I'm calling about the listing for the Christmas Lodge, the Everlight Lodge. There was a pause. You want to see it? Yeah, Marcus said. I think I do. All right. the woman said slowly, skeptically. "I'm Barbara Holt. I can meet you there tomorrow morning. Say, 10 o'clock? That works." "Fair warning," Barbara added. "The place is in bad shape, real bad. You'd be buying it as is, no repairs, no guarantees, and it's been sitting empty for 33 years. Most people who see it turn around and leave." "I understand," Marcus said. "Okay then," Barbara replied. "See you tomorrow." Marcus hung up and stared at the phone in his hand. What was he doing? This was crazy, reckless, irresponsible. But it was also the first thing that had sparked anything resembling hope in 8 months. The next morning, Marcus bundled the kids into the truck. It was Thursday, no school due to a teacher professional development day, which meant he couldn't leave them home alone. Sarah sat in the front seat, Daniel and Emma in the back, all of them wrapped in coats and scarves as the heater struggled to push out lukewarm air. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked as Marcus turned onto the highway leading out of town. "To look at a property," Marcus said. "What kind of property?" "An old lodge, Christmas lodge. It's been abandoned for a long time." Sarah frowned. "Why would we look at that?" Marcus didn't have a good answer. "I don't know, sweetheart. I just want to see it." They drove for 20 minutes through dense forest, the road growing narrower and more winding as they climbed into the foothills. Snow clung to the branches of towering pines, and the sky above was a flat, lifeless gray. Eventually, Marcus turned onto an unmarked dirt road, barely visible through the overgrowth. The truck bounced and jolted over ruts and rocks, and Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter. Then the forest opened up, and there it was. The Everlight Christmas Lodge rose from the snow-covered clearing like something from a forgotten dream. It was massive. 3 stories of weathered stone and dark timber, with steep gabled roofs and a wraparound porch that sagged in places. The windows were dark, some cracked, some boarded up. A massive stone chimney jutted from the center of the structure, covered in dead ivy. Above the front door hung a faded wooden sign, Everlight Christmas Lodge, established 1957. "Whoa," Daniel whispered. The first word he'd spoken all morning. A pristine black SUV was already parked in the overgrown driveway. A woman in her 60s stepped out, dressed in a wool coat and boots that looked far too clean for this environment. She eyed Marcus's rusted truck with barely concealed skepticism. "Barbara Holt," she said, extending a gloved hand. "Marcus Reed," he replied, shaking it. "These are my kids, Sarah, Daniel, and Emma." Barbara glanced at the children, then back at Marcus. "You sure you want to bring them inside? It's not exactly safe." "They've seen worse," Marcus said quietly. Barbara's expression softened slightly. She nodded and pulled a large keyring from her pocket. "All right then, let's take a look." The front door was massive, solid oak, carved with intricate designs of pine trees and snowflakes. Barbara struggled with the lock for a moment before it finally clicked. The door groaned open, releasing a breath of cold, stale air that smelled of dust and time and something else. Something Marcus couldn't quite place. It wasn't decay. It was more like preservation, like the building had been sealed away, frozen in time. They stepped inside. The interior took Marcus's breath away. The entrance opened into a grand main room with cathedral ceilings and exposed timber beams that stretched high overhead. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, so large you could stand inside it. The hearth was blackened with decades of ash, but the stonework was intact, beautiful, each rock carefully placed by skilled hands. Furniture still filled the room. Couches and armchairs draped in dusty sheets. A massive dining table with chairs tucked neatly beneath it. Built-in shelves lined the walls, still holding books, their spines faded but intact. And strangest of all, Christmas decorations. Everywhere, wreaths hung on the walls, their pine needles long since dried to brown. Garland drooped from the beams. A wooden nativity set sat on the mantel, the figures covered in dust but still standing. In the corner, near the fireplace, was a Christmas tree, artificial, 7 feet tall, still decorated with ornaments and tinsel that caught the weak light filtering through the filthy windows. "It's like Santa's house," Emma whispered, eyes wide. Marcus moved deeper into the room, his boots leaving prints in the thick layer of dust on the hardwood floor. Everything was eerily preserved, not destroyed, not vandalized, just abandoned, as if one day Gerald Coleman had simply walked away and never came back. "Why did he leave it like this?" Sarah asked, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I don't know," Barbara said. "Coleman shut the place down in '91, right after his wife died. Stopped taking guests, boarded himself up in here. When they found him 2 months later, dead of a heart attack, everything was just like this, frozen in time." Marcus ran his hand along the back of a chair. The fabric was worn but intact. No mice droppings, no water damage. It didn't make sense. Buildings abandoned for 33 years didn't look like this. They rotted, collapsed, were picked clean by scavengers and vandals, but not this one. "Have people tried to buy it before?" Marcus asked. Barbara nodded. "A few, but once they see it, they get spooked. There's something about this place. People say it doesn't feel right." Marcus looked around. She wasn't wrong. There was something off about the lodge. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it was heavy, like the air itself was weighted with secrets. Daniel had wandered toward a hallway that led to the back of the building. "Dad, come look at this." Marcus followed him through a narrow corridor into what must have been the kitchen. It was enormous. Industrial-sized appliances lined the walls. A huge butcher block island sat in the center. Copper pots and pans still hung from hooks on the ceiling, tarnished but intact. Shelves were stocked with canned goods, their labels faded to illegibility. But Daniel wasn't looking at any of that. He was staring at the floor, at a seam. Marcus knelt down and brushed away the dust. There, almost invisible beneath decades of grime, was a perfectly rectangular outline in the wooden floorboards, about 4 feet by 4 feet, like a hatch or a door. His heart began to pound. "What is that?" Sarah asked, coming up behind them. Marcus traced the seam with his fingers. It was deliberate, precise, cut with purpose. He looked around for a handle or a latch but saw nothing, just smooth boards and the faint outline. Barbara appeared in the doorway. "What did you find?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "A hatch, maybe, or a cellar door." Barbara frowned and knelt beside him. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it along the seam. "I've shown this property a dozen times. I never noticed that." "How do you open it?" Daniel asked. Marcus stood and looked around the kitchen. His eyes landed on a small door set into the wall near the pantry. It was different from the others, newer maybe, or just better maintained. He walked over and tried the handle. Locked. "Do you have keys for this?" he asked Barbara. She shuffled through her key ring and tried several before finding one that fit. The lock clicked. Marcus opened the door. Inside was a small closet, empty except for one thing hanging on a hook at the back, a single brass key on a leather cord. Old, tarnished, but clearly important. Marcus reached for it, his hand trembling slightly. "What's that for?" Emma asked. Marcus turned the key over in his palm. There was an engraving on it, worn almost smooth by time. He could just make out 2 letters. E.L. Everlight Lodge. He walked back to the seam in the floor and knelt down. Now that he was looking more carefully, he could see it. A small keyhole, hidden in the grain of the wood. So subtle you'd never notice it unless you knew to look. Marcus inserted the key. It turned. Something deep beneath the floor clicked, thunked, released. Sarah gasped. "Dad, what did you do?" The hatch shifted. The boards along the seam lifted slightly, revealing darkness beneath. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the boards and pulled. The hatch lifted easily, surprisingly easily, as if it had been opened recently, as if someone had been maintaining it. Cold air rushed up from below, not just cold, freezing, like a blast from a walk-in freezer. The temperature in the kitchen dropped 10 degrees in an instant, and they could all see their breath misting in front of their faces. Marcus shined his phone's flashlight down into the opening. Stone steps descended into darkness, narrow, steep, leading down into what looked like a cellar or basement. "Should we go down there?" Sarah asked, fear creeping into her voice. Barbara stood quickly. "Absolutely not. We don't know what's down there. Could be unstable, could be dangerous." But Marcus was already moving. Something pulled at him. A gravitational force he couldn't explain. He needed to see, needed to know. "Stay here," he said to the kids, then to Barbara. "Watch them. I'll just take a quick look." Before anyone could argue, Marcus descended into the darkness, his phone's flashlight the only guide. The stone steps were solid beneath his feet, cold but dry. As he moved deeper, the temperature continued to drop. By the time he reached the bottom, maybe 15 feet down, his breath came out in thick clouds. The cellar was small, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, concrete walls, no windows, and in the center of the room, illuminated by his trembling flashlight beam, were rows of metal containers, industrial, military grade, sealed tight. Marcus approached the nearest one. It was covered in frost. Ice crystals clung to the metal surface. He wiped them away and read the label. "Property of First National Armored Transport, December 1990. Evidence log C7. Marcus's blood turned to ice. First National Armored Transport. He knew that name. Everyone in this part of the state knew that name. It was the company involved in the Pine Ridge armored car robbery, the biggest unsolved heist in regional history. $270 million stolen. 3 guards killed. No arrests, no recovery. It had happened 33 years ago, in 1990, right around the time Gerald Coleman shut down the lodge. Marcus's hands shook as he pried open the first container. The metal was cold enough to burn, but he didn't care. He pulled the lid free. Inside, stacks of bills, hundreds, thousands, 50s, all vacuum-sealed in plastic, all frozen solid, preserved perfectly. He stumbled back, his legs weak. His vision swam. This wasn't just money. This was the money. The legendary fortune that had destroyed families and ruined lives. The stolen millions that had been searched for by law enforcement, treasure hunters, and conspiracy theorists for over 3 decades. And it had been here, hidden beneath the kitchen floor of a Christmas lodge. Frozen. Waiting. Above him, he heard Sarah calling down. "Dad, are you okay? What did you find?" Marcus couldn't answer. His throat had closed. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might explode. He looked around the small cellar at the rows of containers. At least a dozen of them, maybe more. All marked with the same company name, all sealed, all waiting to be opened. He'd come here looking for a Christmas miracle, a place to give his children hope. Instead, he'd found a secret worth $270 million, a secret that men had killed for, a secret that had been buried for 33 years. And now, standing in the frozen darkness beneath a forgotten lodge, Marcus Reed realized his life would never be the same. Marcus stood frozen at the bottom of the stone steps, his breath coming out in white clouds that hung in the frigid air like ghosts. The beam from his phone's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating frost-covered metal containers stacked in neat rows along the concrete walls. His hands shook so badly he had to grip the phone with both palms to keep the light steady. Above him, he could hear Sarah's voice calling down, worried, asking if he was okay. But he couldn't answer, couldn't form words. His entire body had gone numb, and not from the cold. He forced himself to move, to take one step forward, then another. The concrete floor was bone dry despite being underground. No moisture, no mold. The air itself felt preserved, like it had been sealed away from time. Marcus approached the container he'd opened, the one with stacks of frozen bills visible inside. He reached in with trembling fingers and pulled out one of the vacuum-sealed packages. The plastic was thick, industrial grade, and through it he could see crisp $100 bills pressed together so tightly they looked like a single block of green paper. He turned the package over. There was a label on the back, handwritten in faded ink. Package 73, $20,000, December 10th, 1990. December 10th, 1990. 5 days before the heist. Marcus set the package down carefully, as if it might explode, and moved to the next container. This one was larger, rectangular, and sealed with a heavy padlock that had frost growing between the metal links. He grabbed the lock and pulled. It snapped open easily, the metal brittle from decades of cold. Marcus lifted the lid. Inside were documents, hundreds of them, stacked in precise folders, each one labeled with dates and names. He pulled out the top folder and opened it. Bank transfer records, account numbers, routing information, all from First National Armored Transport, all dated November and December of 1990. He flipped through page after page, his mind racing. These weren't random documents. This was a paper trail, a complete record of the heist, planned down to the smallest detail. Marcus moved faster now, opening container after container. One held bonds, government bonds, bearer bonds worth thousands each. Another held gold coins, dozens of them sealed in plastic sleeves. Another held stock certificates from companies Marcus had never heard of, all dated from the late 80s and early 90s. And another held cash, more cash, stacks and stacks of bills in every denomination. 50s, hundreds, even some older bills, series from the 70s and 80s. In the back corner, Marcus found a container different from the others, smaller, wooden instead of metal. It sat alone, separated from the rest, as if whoever had placed it there wanted it to be found last. Marcus knelt beside it and brushed away the layer of frost covering the lid. There was an engraving carved into the wood, crude but deliberate. "For whoever finds this, may God have mercy on your soul." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He lifted the lid. Inside was a leather journal. The cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. Beside it was a revolver, old and rusted, and a single photograph in a cracked frame. Marcus picked up the photograph first. It showed two men standing in front of the Everlight Lodge, both in their 50s, both smiling. One was tall and broad-shouldered with thick gray hair. The other was shorter, lean, with sharp eyes and a police uniform. Marcus turned the photo over. Written on the back in faded pencil, "Gerald and Vincent, Summer '89, brothers to the end, Vincent." Marcus's blood ran cold. He'd heard that name before. Vincent Marks, the former police chief of Pine Ridge. The man who'd led the investigation into the armored car heist. The man who'd retired abruptly in 1992 and moved out of state without explanation. Marcus set the photo down and picked up the journal with shaking hands. The leather felt fragile, like it might crumble at his touch. He opened it carefully to the first page. January 7th, 1991. "I don't have much time. My heart is failing. The doctor says I have weeks, maybe a month if I'm lucky. But I can't die with this secret. Can't take it to my grave without leaving some record of what happened. What we did. What I allowed." Marcus turned the page, his eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. "Vincent came to me on December 15th, 1990. It was late, after midnight. He was covered in blood. Not his own. He was shaking so hard he could barely stand. He said the job had gone wrong, said it was supposed to be clean. No one was supposed to get hurt. But the guards fought back. Shots were fired. 3 men died. And now Vincent had $270 million in the back of a stolen van and nowhere to hide it. Marcus's hands trembled as he continued reading. I should have called the police, should have turned him in right there. But Vincent and I, we went back 40 years, we grew up together, served in Korea together. He was the closest thing to a brother I ever had. So when he begged me to help him, when he said he had nowhere else to turn, I said yes. God forgive me, I said yes. We brought it here that night, all of it. The cash, the bonds, the documents, everything. We built the cellar in '73 when I renovated the kitchen. It was supposed to be a root cellar, a place to store food for the winter, but it was perfect for this. Hidden, secure, temperature controlled. We sealed it all away, and Vincent said we'd wait for the investigation to cool down, wait for people to stop looking, then we'd split it and disappear. But that never happened. The investigation never stopped. Federal agents crawled all over Pine Ridge for months. Vincent couldn't touch the money without drawing suspicion. Neither could I. So it just sat here, frozen, waiting. And then Margaret died. My sweet Margaret. Heart attack in her sleep. August '88. After that, I couldn't keep the lodge open. Couldn't stand the sound of laughter and children and Christmas music when all I felt was grief. So I closed it, sent the last guests away, locked the doors, and I stayed here alone with the secret buried beneath my kitchen floor. Vincent came by once a month, always at night, always alone. He'd check on the cellar, make sure everything was secure, and then he'd leave. He said we'd figure something out. Said we'd find a way. But we both knew the truth. We were trapped. The money was cursed, tainted with blood, and neither of us had the courage to do what was right. Now I'm dying, and Vincent is still out there, still pretending to be an honest man, still wearing his badge and his lies. I don't know what will happen when I'm gone. If the lodge will be sold, if someone will find the cellar. Part of me hopes they do. Hopes someone braver than me will have the courage to make this right. But mostly, I'm just tired. Tired of the weight. Tired of the guilt. Tired of knowing that 3 good men died so Vincent and I could dream of riches we'd never touch. If you're reading this, then you found it. The fortune that destroyed my life. The secret that killed my soul. I don't know who you are or why you're here, but I'm begging you. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't let greed poison you the way it poisoned us. Do what's right, even if it costs you everything. Gerald Coleman, January 7th, 1991. The journal ended there. Marcus turned to the last page, hoping for more, but found only blank yellowed paper. He closed the journal slowly and sat back against the cold concrete wall. His mind spun. Gerald Coleman and Vincent Marks. Friends. Brothers. One had orchestrated the heist. The other had hidden the evidence. And for 33 years, the truth had been buried beneath the kitchen floor of a Christmas lodge. Marcus looked around the cellar at the rows of containers, at the fortune that had cost 3 men their lives, at the blood money that had destroyed Gerald Coleman's soul, and he realized with devastating clarity that he was now part of this story, that opening the hatch had pulled him into something far bigger and far more dangerous than he could have imagined. "Dad!" Sarah's voice echoed down the stairs, sharp with worry. "Please answer me. Are you okay?" Marcus forced himself to stand. His legs felt weak, unsteady. He grabbed the journal and the photograph and climbed back up the stone steps. When he emerged from the hatch, Sarah, Daniel, and Emma were standing in the kitchen, all 3 staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. Barbara Holt stood behind them, her expression unreadable. "What's down there?" Barbara asked quietly. Marcus looked at her, then at his children. He couldn't tell them the truth, not yet, not until he figured out what to do. "Storage," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just old storage. Nothing important." Sarah frowned. She knew he was lying, but she didn't press. "We should go," Marcus said, closing the hatch and pocketing the brass key. "I've seen enough." Barbara studied him for a long moment. "So? Are you interested in the property?" Marcus's mind raced. If he walked away now, someone else would eventually buy the lodge. Someone else would find the cellar. And then what? Would they keep the money? Would they do what Gerald Coleman couldn't? Or would they turn it over to the authorities? He thought about the medical bills stacked on his kitchen table, about the rent notice with final stamped across it, about his children who deserved so much more than the life he was able to give them. "Yeah," Marcus heard himself say. "I'll take it." Barbara's eyebrows rose. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." "Cash offer, 15,000? Marcus nodded, even though it was every cent he had left, even though it was financial suicide. "All right then," Barbara said slowly. "I'll draw up the paperwork. We can close by the end of the week." The drive back to town was silent. The kids sensed something had shifted, that their father had seen something down in that cellar that had shaken him. But none of them asked questions. They just sat quietly as the truck bounced along the snow-covered road, each lost in their own thoughts. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about the frozen cellar and the journal and the photograph of Gerald Coleman and Vincent Marks standing together like brothers. He opened a new browser tab and typed, "Pine Ridge Armored Car Robbery, 1990. The results flooded in, dozens of articles, news reports, true crime podcasts, even a documentary that had aired on a cable channel 5 years ago. Marcus clicked on the first article, dated December 15, 1990. The headline read, "3 Dead in Armored Car Heist, 270 million Missing." Marcus read carefully, his heart pounding. At approximately 9:45 on the evening of December 14th, 2 armored trucks belonging to First National Armored Transport were ambushed on Route 47 outside Pine Ridge. The trucks were carrying end-of-year cash transfers from 3 regional banks. 4 armed men in ski masks forced the drivers off the road and opened fire when the guards attempted to resist. 3 guards were killed: Raymond Foster, age 32, Michael Chen, age 28, Thomas Brennan, age 41. A 4th guard, Daniel Ortiz, was critically injured but survived. The thieves escaped with an estimated $270 million in cash, bonds, and bearer instruments. Federal investigators described the heist as highly organized and precisely executed, suggesting inside knowledge of transport routes and security protocols. Pine Ridge Police Chief Vincent Marks is leading the investigation in cooperation with the FBI. Chief Marks stated, "We will not rest until the perpetrators are brought to justice and the stolen assets are recovered." Marcus stared at the screen. Vincent Marks, leading the investigation, looking for money he'd already hidden. No wonder the case had gone cold. No wonder no arrests were ever made. He clicked through more articles, piecing together the timeline. The heist happened December 14th. Gerald Coleman wrote in his journal that Vincent came to him after midnight on the 15th. They sealed the money in the cellar that same night. And then for weeks, months, years, Vincent had stood in front of cameras and promised justice while the evidence sat frozen beneath his best friend's kitchen. Marcus found an article from 1992. Chief Marks retires amid budget cuts. After 32 years of service, Pine Ridge Police Chief Vincent Marks announced his retirement yesterday, citing department budget constraints and personal health concerns. Marks, who led the ongoing investigation into the 1990 armored car heist, will be relocating to Florida. Interim Chief Sarah Dennison praised Marks's decades of service, calling him a pillar of the community and a dedicated public servant. Marcus felt sick. Vincent had gotten away with it, had retired with honors, had moved to Florida to live out his days in comfortable anonymity while 3 families mourned their dead and an entire region wondered what had happened to the missing fortune. Marcus kept searching. He found memorial pages for the victims, photographs of Raymond Foster standing beside his wife and young son, Michael Chen in his uniform, smiling, barely older than a kid, and Thomas Brennan. Thomas, who'd survived the initial shooting only to die 3 days later in the hospital, who'd left behind a widow and 2 daughters. Marcus clicked on a link to a news story from 2 years ago. Families of armored car heist victims still seeking closure 3 decades later. The article featured an interview with Diane Brennan, Thomas's widow. She was in her 70s now, her face lined with years of grief. The reporter asked if she'd ever given up hope of finding answers. "Never," Diane said. "Not a day goes by that I don't think about Tom, about what happened to him, about the men who killed him living free somewhere while we suffered. I need to know the truth before I die. I need closure, not just for me, but for my daughters. They deserve to know their father's death meant something." Marcus stared at the photograph of Diane Brennan holding a framed picture of her husband. Her eyes were hollow, haunted, just like his had been for the past 8 months. He thought about Anna, about the last weeks of her life in the hospital, about watching her slip away piece by piece until there was nothing left but a shell, about the helplessness, the rage, the grief that never stopped, and he thought about his children sleeping upstairs, about Sarah carrying weight no 13-year-old should carry, about Daniel retreating into silence, about Emma still asking when Mommy was coming home. He could take the money, could seal the hatch, could use the fortune to give his kids everything they deserved, a real home, security, college, a future. But then he looked at Diane Brennan's face again, at the pain etched into every line. And he knew with absolute certainty that if he kept the money, he'd become exactly what Gerald Coleman had become. A man destroyed by guilt, a man crushed beneath the weight of his own cowardice. Marcus closed the laptop and put his head in his hands. He sat there in the dark kitchen for a long time, wrestling with the impossible choice. Finally, exhausted and defeated, he stood and walked upstairs to check on his children. Sarah was asleep, curled on her side, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Daniel lay on his stomach, his face pressed into the pillow. And Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit, her breathing soft and even. Marcus stood in the doorway watching them, his chest aching. They deserved better, deserved more, deserved a father who could provide. But they also deserved a father who did what was right. Marcus went to his bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Anna's side was still made, the pillow still shaped by her head the last time she'd slept there. He reached over and picked up the framed photograph on her nightstand. Their wedding day, both of them young and hopeful and full of dreams. "What do I do?" Marcus whispered to the photograph. "What would you do?" But he already knew the answer. Anna had always been the moral compass of their relationship, the one who chose principle over convenience, the one who believed doing the right thing mattered, even when it was hard. Marcus set the photo down and pulled out his phone. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he pulled up the contact information for the state police he'd found earlier in his research. His finger hovered over the call button. Just one call. That's all it would take. One call and the truth would come out. The families would have closure. Vincent Marks would face justice, and Marcus would have nothing. No money, no security, no way to save his family from eviction or hunger or the slow grinding poverty that waited for them. He lowered the phone. Not yet. He needed time, needed to think. The next day was Friday. Marcus took the kids to school, then drove to Morrison's lumber yard for his weekend shift. He spent 8 hours cutting boards and loading trucks, his mind 1,000 miles away. His co-workers noticed, asked if he was okay. He lied and said he was fine. After work, he picked up the kids and took them to the library. While they did homework at a table in the children's section, Marcus went back to the computer terminals and continued his research. He pulled up property records for the Everlight Lodge, found the deed transfers going back decades. The property had been in Gerald Coleman's family since it was built in 1957. When Gerald died in 91, it had passed to the bank due to unpaid taxes. It had sat in legal limbo for years before finally being cleared for sale. Marcus searched for more information about Vincent Marks, found an address in Clearwater, Florida, found a LinkedIn profile though it hadn't been updated in years, found a small mention in a local Florida newspaper from 5 years ago. Vincent had volunteered at a police charity fundraiser, still playing the role of the dedicated public servant. Marcus clenched his jaw. The man was living comfortably while Diane Brennan spent 33 years mourning her husband, while Raymond Foster's son grew up without a father, while Michael Chen's family wondered why. That night, Marcus returned to the lodge, alone. He told the kids he had to check on something for work, asked the neighbor to watch them, and drove out into the darkness. The property looked different at night, more imposing. The windows reflected moonlight like empty eyes. The porch creaked as Marcus crossed it. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The beam from his flashlight cut through the dusty interior. He walked straight to the kitchen, pulled out the brass key, and opened the hatch. The cold air rushed up to meet him. Marcus descended the stone steps, his breath misting in the freezing darkness. He spent an hour going through the containers systematically, counting, cataloging, trying to understand the full scope of what Gerald and Vincent had hidden. When he finished, his estimate was conservative but staggering. At least $260 million in recoverable assets, cash, bonds, gold, all of it preserved perfectly in the frozen cellar. As Marcus prepared to leave, he noticed something he'd missed before. Scratched into the concrete wall near the stairs were words, faint, almost invisible, but there. Marcus shined his light directly on them and read, "The truth will set you free, but first it will destroy you." Marcus stood there staring at those words for a long time. Then he climbed the stairs, sealed the hatch, and left the lodge. On the drive home, he noticed headlights behind him. They'd appeared shortly after he left the property and had been following at a constant distance for the past 10 minutes. Marcus turned onto a side road. The headlights followed. He turned again. They followed again. Marcus's pulse quickened. He sped up. The headlights matched his speed. He was being followed. Someone knew. Someone had been watching. Marcus took a series of quick turns, navigating through residential streets until he finally lost the vehicle. He parked behind a closed gas station and sat in the darkness, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, his heart hammering. They knew. Somehow someone knew he'd found the cellar, and now they were coming for it. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room with all the lights off, watching through the window, waiting for headlights that never came. Every sound made him flinch, the creak of the house settling, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind rattling the loose window frame. All of it sounded like footsteps, like someone approaching, like danger closing in. By dawn, his eyes burned and his hands trembled from too much coffee and too much adrenaline. He showered, dressed, and got the kids ready for school like it was any other Friday. But it wasn't. Nothing would ever be normal again. As he dropped them off, Sarah turned to him before getting out of the truck. "Dad," she said quietly, "something's wrong. You've been acting weird since we went to that lodge." Marcus forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." "You're lying," she said, her eyes searching his face. "I can tell." Marcus's chest tightened. She was too smart, too observant, just like her mother. "I promise I'll explain soon," he said. "Just trust me, okay?" Sarah held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded and climbed out. Marcus watched her walk toward the school entrance with Daniel and Emma, and felt the weight of his deception pressing down on his shoulders like stones. After drop-off, Marcus drove to Thompson's Gas and Feed. He needed to think, needed to figure out his next move. He bought coffee and a breakfast sandwich he didn't eat, then sat in his truck in the parking lot staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know what you found. Leave it alone or your family pays the price." Marcus's blood turned to ice. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. He stared at the message, reading it over and over, his mind racing. They knew. Whoever had been following him last night knew about the cellar, and now they were threatening his children. Another text came through. A photograph. Marcus opened it and felt his stomach drop. It was a picture of Sarah, Daniel, and Emma walking into school. Taken this morning, less than 5 minutes ago. The message was clear. "We're watching. We can get to them anytime we want." Marcus's vision blurred with rage and terror. He wanted to scream, wanted to drive to the school and pull his kids out and run. But he forced himself to breathe, to think. Panicking wouldn't help. He needed to be smart. He texted back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who's been waiting 33 years for what's in that cellar. Walk away, sell the property, forget what you saw, or we'll make sure your kids never make it home from school." Marcus stared at the message. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Then he did something he'd been avoiding. He called the one person who might have answers. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered. "Holt Realty." "Barbara, it's Marcus Reed. I need to know who else has looked at the Everlight property. Anyone who's shown unusual interest." There was a pause. "Mr. Reed, I don't typically share information about other potential buyers." "Someone's threatening my family," Marcus said, his voice low and hard. "They know I found something at the lodge, and they're watching my kids, so I need you to tell me right now who else has been asking about that property." Barbara's tone shifted. "Hold on." Marcus heard papers rustling. Then Barbara came back on the line. "There was one man. Came in about 6 months ago. Wanted to know if the property was for sale. I told him it was, but he never made an offer. Just asked a lot of questions about the layout, about the basement. What was his name? He didn't give one. Paid cash for the listing information and left." "What did he look like?" "Older, 60s, maybe 70s, tall, gray hair, expensive suit, had a southern accent, Florida maybe." Marcus's pulse quickened. Florida. Vincent Marks lived in Florida. Did he say anything else? Just that he had history with the property, that he wanted to make sure it was preserved properly. Marcus hung up without saying goodbye. His mind raced. Vincent Marks. It had to be. The former police chief who'd orchestrated the heist and hidden the money, who'd retired to Florida 33 years ago and lived comfortably on his secrets. He'd been monitoring the property, waiting for someone to buy it, waiting to see if the cellar would be discovered. And now Marcus had triggered him. Marcus drove home, checking his rearview mirror constantly. No one followed. But he didn't feel safe. Didn't feel like he could breathe. When he got to the house, he locked all the doors and windows, then sat at the kitchen table trying to figure out what to do. He couldn't go to the local police. Half of them had probably worked under Vincent Marks. Who knew how deep the corruption went? He couldn't just walk away and sell the property. Whoever was threatening him would just kill him and take it anyway. And he couldn't keep the money without putting his children in danger. There was only one option. He had to expose it. All of it. Had to bring the truth into the light so completely that Vincent Marks and whoever else was involved couldn't hide anymore. But first, he needed proof. Evidence that couldn't be denied. Marcus grabbed his laptop and started downloading everything he could find about the 1990 heist. Articles, police reports, court documents. He created a folder on a USB drive and copied it all. Then he photographed the pages of Gerald Coleman's journal with his phone. Every entry, every word. By the time he had to pick up the kids from school, Marcus had assembled a digital record of everything. He uploaded it to a cloud storage account, sent copies to 3 different email addresses he created just for this purpose. If something happened to him, the truth would still get out. At pickup, Marcus watched every car, every person, looking for threats, looking for the man who'd sent those texts. But everything seemed normal. Parents in minivans, kids with backpacks, the everyday rhythm of a Friday afternoon. Sarah climbed into the truck first, followed by Daniel and Emma. As Marcus pulled out of the parking lot, Sarah turned to him. "Dad, there was a man at school today, standing by the fence during recess. He was watching us." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did he look like?" "Old, gray hair. He didn't do anything, just watched. It was creepy." Marcus forced himself to stay calm. "Did you tell a teacher?" "Yeah. But by the time she came outside, he was gone." Marcus drove home in silence, his mind screaming. They'd been at the school, had been close enough to his children to watch them through a fence. The message was clear. We can reach them any time. That night, after dinner, Marcus sat his children down in the living room. He couldn't keep lying to them. Couldn't keep them in the dark when their lives might depend on knowing the truth. "I need to tell you something," he began. "And I need you to listen carefully." 3 pairs of eyes stared at him. Sarah's worried, Daniel's cautious, Emma's confused. "When we went to the lodge, I found something in the cellar. Something that doesn't belong to us. Something that was stolen a long time ago." Sarah's eyes widened. "Stolen? What do you mean?" Marcus took a breath. "Money. A lot of money. From a robbery that happened 33 years ago. 3 men were killed. The people who did it hid the money at the lodge, and now someone knows I found it. They're threatening us, telling me to walk away." Daniel spoke for the first time in days. "Are we in danger?" Marcus wanted to lie, wanted to tell them everything would be fine, but he'd already decided no more lies. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think we are." Sarah stood up, her face pale. "Then give it back. Turn it in. Why would you keep it if it's putting us in danger?" "I'm not keeping it," Marcus said. "I'm going to turn it in. But the people who stole it don't know that. They think I might take it, and they're trying to scare me into giving them access to it." "Who are they?" Sarah asked. "I don't know for sure, but I think one of them is a former police chief, a man named Vincent Marks." Emma climbed into Marcus's lap. "I'm scared, Daddy." Marcus held her tight. "I know, baby, but I promise I'm going to keep you safe. All of you." "How?" Daniel asked, his voice small. Marcus looked at his son, at this 10-year-old boy who'd already lost too much. "By doing the right thing, by making sure the truth comes out. What happens next will turn this nightmare upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more." The weekend crawled by in tense silence. Marcus kept the kids inside, locked the doors, checked the windows every hour. His phone buzzed with more texts from the unknown number, each one more threatening than the last. "You have 48 hours. Your daughter is very pretty. Would be a shame if something happened to her." "We know where you sleep." Marcus didn't respond, didn't engage, just documented everything, screenshot every message, saved every timestamp, building his case. On Sunday afternoon, Marcus made a decision. He needed to meet the victims, needed to look into their eyes and understand what his choice would mean. He left the kids with his neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Chen, who'd been helping him since Anna died, and drove 3 hours north to a town called Riverside. That's where Diane Brennan lived, Thomas Brennan's widow, the woman who'd spent 33 years waiting for answers. Marcus had called ahead, told her he had information about the heist. She'd agreed to meet him at a small diner on the edge of town. When Marcus walked in, he recognized her immediately from the news articles. She sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, eyes hollow and tired. "Mrs. Brennan?" Marcus asked, approaching slowly. She looked up. "Mr. Reed?" Marcus nodded and slid into the booth across from her. Up close, he could see the years of grief etched into every line of her face. She was in her early 70s now, thin and frail, but there was steel in her eyes. "You said you have information about the robbery," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "About what happened to my husband." Marcus nodded. "I do. But first I need to know. If you could have closure, real closure, even if it meant opening old wounds, would you want it?" Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Every day for 33 years I've prayed for closure. I've prayed to know the truth, to understand why Tom died, why those men were never caught. So yes, Mr. Reed, I would want it, no matter what it costs." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of the pages from Gerald Coleman's journal. He slid them across the table. "I bought a property recently, an old lodge outside Pine Ridge. When I was going through it, I found a hidden cellar, and in that cellar I found this, a confession, from the man who helped hide the money." Diane's hands trembled as she picked up the papers. She read slowly, her eyes moving across Gerald Coleman's shaky handwriting. When she finished, tears streamed down her face. "Vincent Marks," she whispered. "The police chief. He was the one?" Marcus nodded. "He orchestrated the whole thing, then spent decades pretending to investigate it while the evidence sat frozen beneath his friend's kitchen floor." Diane covered her mouth with her hand. "All this time, all these years, he stood at Tom's funeral, shook my hand, told me he'd find the men responsible, and it was him." "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. Diane wiped her eyes. "Where is it now? The money?" "Still in the cellar. I haven't touched it, haven't moved it, but someone knows I found it. They're threatening my family, telling me to walk away." Diane looked at him sharply. "Vincent?" "I think so, or someone working for him." Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and gripped Marcus's hand. "You have to turn it in. All of it. You have to expose him." "I know," Marcus said, "but I have 3 kids, and whoever's threatening me has already shown they can get close to them. I'm terrified of what they'll do if I go public." "Then go to someone bigger than them," Diane said fiercely. "Federal agents, state police, someone Vincent can't touch." Marcus nodded. "I'm working on it, but I wanted to meet you first. Wanted to look you in the eye and understand what this means. What my choice will cost." Diane squeezed his hand tighter. "It will cost you peace, safety, maybe your life. But it will also give 3 families the truth we've been denied for 33 years. It will put a murderer behind bars, and it will prove that my husband's death wasn't meaningless." Her voice broke on that last word. "Tom was a good man, Mr. Reed. He was kind. He loved his daughters. He worked hard every day to provide for us. And he died because Vincent Marks wanted money. For 33 years I've lived with the pain of knowing his killers were free, that they got away with it. Please, don't let that continue. Please make this right." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I will. I promise." Diane released his hand and wiped her eyes. "Do you have children, Mr. Reed?" 3. Sarah's 13, Daniel's 10, Emma's 6. "And their mother?" "She died 8 months ago. Cancer." Diane's expression softened. "Then you understand. You understand what it's like to lose someone, to have them ripped away and feel powerless to do anything about it." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. "Don't let powerlessness win," Diane said. "You have the power now, the power to bring justice. Use it." Marcus drove home as the sun set, Diane's words echoing in his mind. When he got back to Pine Ridge, he picked up his kids from Mrs. Chen's house and took them home. After putting Emma to bed and sending Daniel to brush his teeth, Marcus found Sarah in the kitchen doing homework. "Dad," she said, looking up, "where did you go today?" Marcus sat down across from her. "I went to meet someone, the widow of one of the men killed in the robbery, the one whose money is hidden at the lodge." Sarah's eyes widened. "What did she say?" "She asked me to make it right, to expose the people who did it."
"Are you going to?"
Marcus looked at his daughter, at this young woman who'd grown up too fast and carried too much. "What do you think I should do?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom used to say that doing the right thing isn't about what's easy. It's about what you can live with. Can you live with keeping that money, knowing where it came from?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I can't." "Then you already know what to do." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep again. He sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, composing an email. It took him 2 hours to get the words right. When he finished, he read it over one more time. "To FBI Field Office, State Police Major Crimes Division, U.S. Attorney's Office. Subject: Evidence in the 1990 Pine Ridge armored car robbery. My name is Marcus Reed. I am writing to report the discovery of evidence related to the December 1990 armored car robbery in Pine Ridge. I recently purchased a property known as the Everlight Christmas Lodge. During renovation, I discovered a hidden cellar containing what I believe to be the stolen assets from that crime, including cash, bonds, and documentation. I also discovered a written confession from the property's previous owner, Gerald Coleman, stating that former Pine Ridge Police Chief Vincent Marks orchestrated the robbery and used Coleman's property to hide the proceeds. I am prepared to turn over all evidence and provide full cooperation with any investigation. However, I am currently receiving threats from individuals who know about my discovery and are attempting to intimidate me into silence. I have 3 minor children and fear for their safety. I am requesting immediate federal protection and asking that this matter be handled with the highest level of urgency and discretion. Attached, you will find photographs of the confession, the cellar, and the threatening messages I have received. Respectfully, Marcus Reed." Marcus attached all the files he'd compiled, then moved his cursor over the send button. His finger hovered. Once he sent this, there was no going back. The truth would come out. Vincent Marks would be arrested, the money would be recovered, and Marcus's life would never be the same. But neither would Diane Brennan's, or the families of Raymond Foster and Michael Chen. They'd finally have answers, finally have justice. Marcus clicked send. The response came faster than he expected. Less than 2 hours later, his phone rang. Unknown number. Marcus hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Reed," a woman's voice. Professional, calm. "Yes. This is Special Agent Karen Vasquez with the FBI. I received your email. We need to talk in person, tonight if possible." Marcus's heart pounded. "Okay. Where?" "There's a state police barracks 30 minutes south of Pine Ridge. Can you meet me there in 1 hour?" "I have kids. I can't leave them alone." "Bring them. We'll have officers with them while we talk." "Mr. Reed, if what you're telling me is true, this is one of the biggest breaks we've had in decades. And if Vincent Marks is threatening you, we need to move fast." "He's in Florida." "Not anymore," Agent Vasquez said. "We've had surveillance on him for years as part of a separate investigation. He flew into the regional airport 2 days ago. He's here, in Pine Ridge." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Vincent was here, in town, watching. "Get to the barracks," Agent Vasquez said. "Don't stop anywhere. Don't call anyone. Just drive straight there. We'll be waiting." Marcus woke the kids, told them to get dressed quickly. Sarah didn't ask questions, just helped Daniel and Emma get ready. Within 10 minutes, they were in the truck heading south on dark, empty roads. Marcus checked his rearview mirror constantly. Every pair of headlights made his pulse spike. but no one followed. At least, no one he could see. The state police barracks appeared like a fortress in the darkness. Floodlights, chain-link fence, armed officers. Marcus pulled into the parking lot and was immediately met by 2 agents in dark suits. "Mr. Reed?" one asked. Marcus nodded. "Come with us. We'll take care of your children. They'll be safe here." Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "Dad, what's happening?"
It's okay, Marcus said. These are federal agents. I called them. They're here to help.
A female officer appeared, young and kind-faced. "Hi, guys," she said to the kids. "I'm Officer Martinez. Want to come with me? We've got hot chocolate and video games inside." Emma looked at Marcus uncertainly. He knelt down and hugged her. "Go ahead, baby. I'll be right here, I promise." The kids were led inside. Marcus was taken to a different building, a secure room with concrete walls and no windows. Waiting inside were 2 people, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and a man in his 50s with graying hair and a state police badge. "Mr. Reed, I'm Special Agent Vasquez," the woman said. "This is Lieutenant Connors, State Police Major Crimes. Sit down, we need to hear everything." Marcus sat, and for the next 3 hours he told them the whole story. From buying the lodge, to finding the hatch, to reading Gerald Coleman's confession, to the threatening texts, to meeting Diane Brennan. He showed them everything. The photos, the journal pages, the messages. When he finished, Agent Vasquez and Lieutenant Connors exchanged a look. "We need to secure that cellar," Connors said, "tonight, before Vincent knows we're involved." "He already knows," Marcus said. "He's been watching me. He knows I found it." "Then we move now," Vasquez said. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "I need a tactical team at the Everlight Lodge, full securing operation, and I need a warrant for Vincent Marks. Conspiracy, murder, theft, all of it." She hung up and looked at Marcus. "You did the right thing, Mr. Reed. Coming forward, a lot of people in your position would have kept quiet." "I almost did," Marcus admitted. "But you didn't, and because of that, 3 families are finally going to get justice." Within the hour, a convoy of vehicles rolled out toward the Everlight Lodge. Marcus rode with Agent Vasquez, his kids safe at the barracks with protective detail. As they approached the property, Marcus saw lights. The lodge was lit up like Christmas, floodlights illuminating every corner. But something was wrong. The front door was open. "Someone's here," Vasquez said sharply. She radioed the tactical team. "Possible hostile on site. Proceed with caution." Armed agents moved toward the building in formation. Marcus waited in the SUV, his heart in his throat. Minutes passed. Then a voice crackled over the radio. "Building clear, but we've got a problem. The cellar's been opened. Someone's been inside." Vasquez cursed under her breath. She looked at Marcus. "Stay here." Then she was gone, moving toward the lodge with her weapon drawn. Marcus waited and waited. Finally, Vasquez returned, her expression grim. "The containers are still there," she said, "but someone went through them, recently, within the last few hours." "Vincent," Marcus said. "Probably, but he didn't take anything, just looked, like he was making sure it was still there." "Why would he do that?" Vasquez met his eyes. "Because he's been planning this for 33 years, and now that you've forced his hand, he's making his move." As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "You shouldn't have called the feds, Marcus. Now everyone you love will pay." Attached was another photo, this one of the state police barracks, taken from outside, showing the building where his children were supposedly safe. Marcus's blood turned to ice. "He knows where my kids are!" Vasquez grabbed the phone, read the message, and immediately radioed command. "We have a potential threat at the barracks. Lock it down, now." But Marcus knew it was too late. Vincent Marks had been waiting 33 years for someone to find his fortune, and he wasn't going to let it go without a fight. The war for truth had just begun, and Marcus Reed had just painted a target on his family's back. The drive back to the state police barracks felt like it took hours instead of minutes. Marcus sat rigid in the passenger seat of Agent Vasquez's SUV, his phone clutched in his white-knuckled grip, staring at the photo Vincent Marks had sent. The barracks, his children inside. A threat so clear it didn't need words.
"They're safe," Vasquez said, her voice firm. "We have armed officers with them. Marks can't get inside."
"You don't know that," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "He was police chief for 30 years. He knows how these buildings work. He knows the protocols. He could walk right through the front door and no one would question him." Vasquez's jaw tightened. She pressed harder on the accelerator. When they pulled into the parking lot, Marcus was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped. He sprinted toward the building, his heart hammering, expecting the worst, expecting gunshots, screaming, chaos. Instead, he found his children exactly where he'd left them, in a secured room on the second floor, playing video games with Officer Martinez. Sarah looked up when Marcus burst through the door, her face flooding with relief.
"Dad!"
Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled all 3 of them into his arms. He held them so tight Emma squeaked in protest, but he couldn't let go, couldn't breathe. All he could think about was that photo, that threat, how close they'd come to something terrible. "Sir," Officer Martinez said gently, "we've been on full lockdown since Agent Vasquez called. No one's come near this room. They're safe." Marcus nodded but didn't release his children. Over their heads he saw Agent Vasquez standing in the doorway, phone to her ear. She was talking rapidly, her expression dark. Finally she hung up and approached Marcus. "We've got units moving on Vincent Marks's location. He's staying at the Pine Ridge Motor Lodge under an assumed name. We'll have him in custody within the hour."
"You're sure?"
Marcus asked. "Positive. We've had eyes on him since he landed. We were building a case before you even contacted us. Your evidence just accelerated our timeline." Marcus slowly released his children. Emma's eyes were wide and frightened. Daniel looked pale, but Sarah, his oldest, his strongest, looked angry.
"Who's trying to hurt us?" she demanded.
Marcus knelt in front of her. "A man who did something terrible a long time ago. A man who spent 33 years hiding from what he did. But he's not going to hurt us. I promise." "How can you promise that?" Sarah asked, tears welling in her eyes. "How can you promise when Mom couldn't even promise she'd get better?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah had never said anything like that before, had never voiced the anger and betrayal she must have felt watching her mother die, despite all the promises that everything would be okay. Marcus pulled her close. "You're right," he whispered. "I can't promise nothing bad will happen, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. And right now, that means trusting these people to do their jobs." Sarah cried against his shoulder. Daniel and Emma joined them, all 4 of them huddled together on the floor of a police barracks while armed agents stood guard outside. An hour later, Agent Vasquez returned. "We have him. Vincent Marks is in custody. No shots fired. No resistance. He's being transported to federal holding as we speak." Marcus felt something inside him release, a tension he'd been carrying for days, maybe longer, maybe since Anna died. What happens now? Now we process the scene at the lodge, catalog everything, build the case. You and your children will need to stay in protective custody until we're certain there are no other parties involved. Could be a few days, maybe a week. Marcus nodded. "Can I see him? Vincent Marks?" Vasquez frowned. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because I need to look him in the eye, need to understand what kind of man destroys so many lives for money he never even spent." Vasquez considered this. "I'll see what I can arrange." 2 days later, Marcus sat in a stark interrogation room at the federal building 3 hours north of Pine Ridge. Across from him, separated by a metal table and 33 years of lies, sat Vincent Marks. Up close, the man looked smaller than Marcus had imagined. He was in his late 70s now, his hair completely white, his face deeply lined. He wore an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, but his eyes were sharp, alert, unrepentant. "You're the one who found it," Vincent said. His voice was rough, tinged with a southern accent that decades in Florida had deepened. "I am," Marcus replied. "Gerald always said someone would. Said the lodge would eventually be sold and some unlucky bastard would stumble on his guilt." Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Guess that was you." "Why'd you do it?" Marcus asked. "You had a career, a pension, respect. Why throw it all away?" Vincent laughed, a sound like gravel in a can. "You think I had respect? I was a small-town police chief making $35,000 a year. I watched criminals get rich while I scraped by. Watched businessmen in suits steal millions legally while I arrested kids for shoplifting. The system's rigged, son. Always has been. I just decided to rig it in my favor for once." "So you killed 3 men." Vincent's expression didn't change. "Collateral damage. They weren't supposed to fight back. Weren't supposed to be heroes. That's on them." Marcus felt rage building in his chest. One of them was Thomas Brennan, father of 2 daughters. His wife spent 33 years waiting for answers while you played the grieving public servant at his funeral. "And," Vincent said coldly, "what difference does it make now? They're all dead. Diane Brennan's gonna die soon. The other families have moved on. The only person my arrest hurts is me." "You're wrong," Marcus said quietly. "Your arrest gives them closure, gives them justice, proves their loved ones didn't die for nothing." Vincent snorted. "You're naive. Justice is just a word powerful people use to make the rest of us feel better about getting screwed. You think turning in that money makes you noble? You're just another Mark who bought into the lie." Marcus stood. "I'd rather be a Mark with a clear conscience than a rich man who can't sleep at night." "Gerald Coleman couldn't sleep at night," Vincent said. "And what did it get him? Dead at 72, alone, eaten up by guilt. That what you want?" Marcus leaned on the table. "No. What I want is to look my children in the eye and know I did the right thing. Can you say the same?" Vincent's expression finally flickered. Something dark crossed his face. "I don't have children."
"I know," Marcus said, "and maybe that's the difference between us." He walked out of the interrogation room and didn't look back.
The media descended on Pine Ridge like locusts. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. Cable news, newspapers, social media. The headlines varied, but the theme was consistent. Widowed father solves 33-year-old mystery. Single dad chooses justice over fortune. The man who gave away $270 million. Marcus refused most interview requests, but he did agree to one. A sit-down with a respected journalist who'd covered the original heist in 1990. The interview was conducted at the barracks while Marcus and his children were still in protective custody. "Why did you come forward?" the journalist asked. "You could have kept the money, disappeared, given your children a completely different life." Marcus thought about this carefully. "I could have, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it. But I kept coming back to one question. What kind of father would I be if I taught my kids that it's okay to build a life on someone else's suffering? Some would say you put principle over your children's well-being." "And they'd be wrong," Marcus said firmly. "My children's well-being isn't just about money. It's about knowing their father is someone they can respect, someone who does what's right even when it costs him everything." The interview aired on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, Marcus's phone was flooded with messages, some supportive, some critical, but one stood out. It was from Diane Brennan. "Thank you for giving me the truth. Thank you for proving Tom's death mattered. You're a good man, Marcus Reed. Your wife would be proud." Marcus read the message 3 times, tears blurring his vision. He saved it, knew he'd need it on the hard days ahead. The legal proceedings took months. Vincent Marks was charged with 3 counts of felony murder, conspiracy to commit robbery, and a dozen other crimes. He pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. Gerald Coleman's confession, the recovered money, financial records showing Vincent had made inquiries about the property, the threatening messages sent to Marcus. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Marcus testified. So did Diane Brennan and the families of the other victims. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Vincent Marks was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He'd die in prison. The courtroom erupted in tears and applause when the verdict was read. Marcus sat quietly, his children beside him, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. But the story wasn't over. The recovered assets were processed by federal authorities. After legal fees, insurance claims, and governmental seizures, the victims' families received settlements. Diane Brennan and her daughters got $3 million. The families of Raymond Foster and Michael Chen received similar amounts. It wouldn't bring their loved ones back, but it acknowledged their loss in a tangible way. And Marcus. He received a finder's fee. Standard practice in cases involving recovered stolen property. The amount stunned him. $250,000. More money than he'd ever seen. More than enough to solve every problem he'd been drowning in. He paid off Anna's medical bills first. Every single one. Then the funeral costs. Then the back rent, the electric bill, the credit cards, the truck repairs. All the debts that had been crushing him for months disappeared in a matter of days. What remained, Marcus put into a trust for his children, for college, for their futures, for the life Anna had wanted them to have. But he kept a portion for something else, something that had been growing in his mind since the day he'd first walked into the Everlight Lodge. 6 months after Vincent's conviction, Marcus stood in front of the lodge with a crew of contractors. The building had been released from evidence. It was his again, legally, officially. And he had a plan. "We're going to restore it," he told the crew. "All of it. Roof, plumbing, electrical, everything. And when we're done, we're going to turn it into something the town needs." "What's that?" the foreman asked. "A community center," Marcus said. "A place for families going through hard times. Grief counseling, support groups. A space where people can come together and heal." He'd already filed the paperwork, already established it as a nonprofit, already chosen a name, the Anna Reed Memorial Center. His children helped with the renovation. Sarah painted walls. Daniel learned basic carpentry. Emma, now 7, organized donated books for the library they were building in what used to be Gerald Coleman's office. They worked weekends and summers, transforming the lodge from a monument to greed into something that honored love and community. The grand opening was held on a crisp October afternoon, almost exactly a year after Marcus had first seen the property listing at Thompson's Gas and Feed. Hundreds of people showed up. Locals who'd watched the story unfold, reporters who'd covered the trial, victims' families who wanted to see what had become of the place that had held their pain for so long. Diane Brennan cut the ribbon. Her hands shook as she held the scissors, but her eyes were clear and bright. "This building was once a tomb," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "A place where secrets were buried and lives were destroyed." But Marcus Reed saw something different. He saw possibility. He saw redemption. And because of him, this place will now be a sanctuary. A space where people can find hope in their darkest moments. The crowd applauded. Marcus stood off to the side with his children, watching. Sarah leaned against him. "Mom would love this," she said softly. Marcus put his arm around her. "Yeah, she would." The center opened its doors the next day. The first visitor was a woman who'd lost her husband in a car accident 3 months earlier. She sat in the grief support group and cried. and for the first time since his death, she didn't cry alone. Over the following months, the center became exactly what Marcus had hoped: a gathering place, a refuge. Veterans met there to talk about PTSD. Widows and widowers shared their stories. Families struggling with addiction found resources and support. The lodge that had once hidden death and greed now radiated life and healing. Marcus ran the center full-time. The finder's fee had been enough that he could quit his custodian job and focus entirely on the work. He hired staff, brought in counselors, organized programs, and slowly, carefully, he began to heal too. His children healed as well. Sarah, now 14, started volunteering at the center. She ran a support group for teens who'd lost parents. She was so much like Anna it sometimes made Marcus's chest ache. Strong, compassionate, unafraid to sit with people in their pain. Daniel, 11 now, had started talking again. Really talking. He'd made friends at school, joined the robotics club, started smiling. The silence that had defined him after Anna's death had finally broken. And Emma. Sweet Emma, who'd asked every day when Mommy was coming home. She'd stopped asking, not because she'd forgotten, but because she'd found ways to remember that didn't hurt so much. She kept a photo of Anna in her room, talked to it sometimes, told her mother about her day, about the things she was learning, about how proud she was of her daddy. One evening, nearly 2 years after Marcus had first discovered the cellar, he sat alone in the lodge's great room. The massive fireplace was lit, flames crackling and dancing. The Christmas decorations that had been there when he first arrived were gone, replaced with photos of Anna, of the families who'd been affected by the heist, of the community coming together to transform tragedy into hope. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to the photo of Anna he kept as his wallpaper. Their wedding day. Both of them young and full of dreams. "We did it," he whispered to the image. "We made something good from something terrible." He thought about the journey, about the moment he'd seen that property listing and made a decision that changed everything, about finding the cellar and facing an impossible choice, about meeting Diane Brennan and understanding what justice really meant, about the fear when Vincent threatened his children, about the relief when Vincent was finally arrested, and he thought about the lesson in all of it, the one he'd try to teach his children for the rest of his life. Integrity isn't easy. Doing the right thing often costs us more than we want to pay. But the cost of living with lies, with guilt, with the knowledge that we chose comfort over conscience, that cost is even higher. It eats away at our souls in ways money can never repair. Gerald Coleman had learned that lesson too late. He'd lived his final years crushed beneath the weight of his choices. He'd died alone, consumed by guilt, unable to escape the prison he'd built around himself. But Marcus had chosen differently. And in choosing truth over treasure, he'd found something far more valuable. He'd found purpose, found community, found a way to honor Anna's memory that would last long after he was gone. The Pine Ridge Gazette ran a feature story on the 2-year anniversary of Vincent Marks's arrest. The headline read, "From Vault to Values, How One Man's Integrity Transformed a Town." The article detailed everything: the discovery, the trial, the recovery, the transformation of the lodge. But it also talked about something deeper, about how Marcus Reed's choice had rippled through Pine Ridge in unexpected ways. The town had been forced to confront its past, to acknowledge that one of its most respected leaders had been a murderer, to examine how corruption could hide in plain sight for decades. It had been painful, divisive, but ultimately necessary. And from that reckoning had come change. New oversight on law enforcement, community accountability boards, transparency initiatives. The town had looked at its reflection and decided to be better. Marcus framed the article and hung it in the center's hallway. Not because it celebrated him, but because it proved that one person's choice could change more than just their own life. 3 years after opening, the Anna Reed Memorial Center had served over 2,000 people. Grief groups, addiction recovery, job training, after-school programs. It had become the heart of Pine Ridge, the place people went when they needed help, when they needed hope. Marcus stood on the lodge's wrap-around porch one December evening, watching snow fall through the pines. It was almost Christmas. The center was decorated just like Anna would have done, lights strung along the railings, a wreath on every door, and inside, families gathered for a holiday celebration, families who were struggling, who were grieving, who were broken but healing. Sarah came outside, wrapped in a coat, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Thought you could use this," she said, handing him one. Marcus smiled. "Thanks, sweetheart." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the snow. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Turning in the money?" Marcus looked at her, at his daughter who'd grown into a remarkable young woman. "Never. Not even once. Not even when things were really hard, when we didn't have enough?" "Not even then," Marcus said, "because we always had enough of what mattered. We had each other. We had integrity. We had the knowledge that we were building something real on a foundation of truth. Money couldn't buy that." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I'm proud of you, Dad. Mom would be too." Marcus's throat tightened. He pulled his daughter close. "I'm proud of you too. All of you. You kids have been through hell and you came out stronger." "We learned from the best," Sarah said. Inside, Marcus could hear laughter, music, the sounds of community and connection. Emma was helping younger kids decorate cookies. Daniel was showing a group of teenagers the robotics project he'd been working on. And throughout the building, people who'd been strangers were becoming friends, united by shared pain and shared hope. This was what $270 million couldn't buy. This sense of purpose. This knowledge that you'd made the world incrementally better. This legacy built not on wealth, but on doing what was right even when it cost everything. Marcus thought about Vincent Marks sitting in a prison cell, alone with his choices. He thought about Gerald Coleman, who died crushed beneath guilt. And he thought about himself, standing on a porch with his daughter, watching snow fall on a building that had become a beacon of hope. He'd chosen differently, and that had made all the difference. Years would pass. Sarah would go to college on a scholarship, studying social work, determined to help others the way her father had. Daniel would become an engineer, building things that helped people. Emma would grow up strong and kind, carrying her mother's compassion and her father's integrity into everything she did. The center would continue to serve Pine Ridge for decades. Long after Marcus was gone, it would stand as a testament to the power of choosing principle over profit. And the story of the widowed father who gave away a fortune would be told and retold, becoming local legend. Some would call him a fool, others would call him a hero. But Marcus didn't care about either label. He cared about the truth, about the families who'd finally gotten justice, about the community he'd helped heal, about the children he'd raised to understand that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the integrity you maintain. Because in the end, anyone can find money buried in a cellar. But it takes true courage to understand that some things are more valuable than treasure. Things like honor, like justice, like the ability to look your children in the eye and know you chose what was right over what was easy. As the December wind whispered through the pines and Christmas lights glowed warm against the darkness, Marcus Reed stood on the porch of the lodge that had changed his life and felt something he hadn't felt since Anna died. Complete, whole, at peace. Not because he had wealth, but because he'd discovered something far more precious. He'd learned that redemption doesn't come from what we find in the cold and dark places of the world. It comes from what we choose to do when we bring those secrets into the light. Anyone can stumble upon fortune if they're desperate enough to search for it. But it takes a soul forged in loss, tempered by grief and strengthened by love to understand that the greatest treasures aren't the ones we keep, they're the ones we give away. As morning broke over the Everlight Lodge, Marcus Reed didn't count dollars or calculate what might have been. He counted something far more valuable: the lives touched, the families healed, the community transformed, and the children who'd learned that their father's greatest gift wasn't money hidden in a frozen cellar, but the courage to choose truth when lies would have been easier. The widowed mechanic who once thought an abandoned Christmas lodge might give his grieving children one last holiday memory had instead given them something that would echo through generations. A legacy built not on stolen millions, but on the unshakable foundation of integrity. And in the end, that made all the difference. The end. Up next, two more powerful stories of courage, redemption, and the choices that define us. Click to continue the journey, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that doing what's right is always worth more than doing what's easy.